Hi ladies and gentlemen, so today's session is going to be a little bit of everything. It's the last of the memory, so last of Unit 3, which is great. So we're going to be looking at a little bit of everything today. So when we're looking at memory, we also need to look at brain trauma. So brain trauma is a general term that refers to any brain injury that impairs the function of the brain. The neurodegenerative disease is a disorder that is characterized by the gradual decline in the structure and activity of brain tissues. Neurons within the brain, or neuro, gradually deteriorate, so degenerate, and lose their function, therefore the term neurodegenerative. You'll notice with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, you have to use the word a neurodegenerative disease. So make sure you include it whenever you come across one of those terms. Amnesia is one of the ones that is looked at in VCAR study design. We tend to look at anterograde amnesia. So amnesia is a loss of memory that is more substantial and not considered with ordinary forgetting. So it's not something that you get gradually with age. It is something a little bit more, perhaps through brain injury. So anterograde amnesia occurs when an individual is unable to form new memories after the trauma, right? And I tend to remember it as, because it starts with an A, you forget things after. The individual loses the ability to form or store new long-term memories, although they can form new implicit memories. Remember, implicit memories are how to. So you could still teach them how to play chess, how to ride a bike and do all that sort of stuff, and they would remember how to do it, but not that they have learnt how to do it. So all of a sudden they might be riding a bike where they couldn't do it before. They are able to retrieve memories from before the trauma, and it's usually associated with damage to the medial temporal lobe area, particularly in the hippocampus. So make sure you're aware of that. There is a different type of amnesia called retrograde amnesia, which is for memories before the trauma. So they don't remember anything before, but they can form new memories. Now, more often than not, VCE Psychology looks at anterograde only. All right, so one of the more common ones, or a case study that's looked at in VCE, is the case of HM. Now, HM was a male who received brain surgery to treat his severe epilepsy. HM had most of his medial temporal lobe removed, so we already know that that is likely to cause anterograde amnesia. So it did remove almost each of the hippocampus and amygdala. In fact, the stuff that they didn't remove was so damaged that it was pointless anyway. So after the surgery, he was unable to remember anything that happened in the 2 years before the surgery and had partial memory loss dating back 10 years. He also suffered anterograde amnesia, and he was unable to form new explicit memory, so he couldn't learn anything new about facts or events in his life. His short-term memory was basically normal, so as long as he's paying attention to a task, he was able to learn and retain new motor skills. So as long as he's paying attention, he's fine. But as soon as he gets distracted or stops paying attention, it's not going to transfer to long-term memory. The only ones that do are procedural memories, so your skills. So they're looking at different elements. So the hippocampus. So HM's case showed that the removal of damage or damage to the hippocampus can actually substantially disrupt memory. It doesn't affect procedural memories, but does affect explicit. Now, explicit, once again, are your declarative memories that you can state, so your facts and your episodes in your life. It is believed that this is because new explicit memories are unable to be consolidated, because you've got to remember that the hippocampus is there for the consolidation of memories. Given HM's short-term memory was fairly normal, it is believed that the hippocampus isn't involved in short-term memory functioning. So his amygdala was also damaged and some of it removed. And if you have damage to the amygdala, it has problems with emotional memories. an individual may be able to recall the memory, but not the emotional qualities of the event. So even if he recalled his wedding, there is a good chance that he won't remember any emotional attachments associated with it. The amygdala doesn't affect short-term memory, procedural or explicit memory. The removal of one or both of the amygdala also leads to the inability to acquire a conditioned fear response. The cerebral cortex. So if one or more cortical areas are removed, serious memory issues can result. As a result, different areas of the cortex specialize in different functions, so the results can vary. For example, damage to the left hemisphere is often worse for recall of verbal material, whilst damage to the right is worse for visual material. As HM could still retrieve old memory and his cortex was mainly intact, it is believed that cortex plays an important role in the retrieval of memories. Damage to the frontal lobe seems to disrupt this retrieval process. Damage to the frontal lobe has a major impact on short-term memory, as they are involved in regulating attention. And you've got to think about Phineas Gage, which you learned about in year 11. So, cerebellum, that's that little cauliflower thing at the back of your brain, down the bottom, and it deals with simple reflex classically conditioned motor responses. Damage to the cerebellum can therefore result in the loss of these conditioned motor responses, such as the eye blink response to a puff of air. Damage to the cerebellum can also impair spatial learning and memory. So when you're going through these and you're making your own notes, and I strongly recommend that you do, you should actually write it like a table or perhaps like a diagram that shows what each of the different features of the brain do. So, another neurodegenerative disease will be Alzheimer's disease, and it's a type of dementia. And I'm just going to stop here and mention that when you're looking at this, a lot of people get this wrong and say that Alzheimer's disease is dementia. This is actually incorrect. Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia, and you need to be very careful with your wording. And it's the widespread deterioration of the brain neurons, which causes memory decline, gradual loss of cognitive and social skills, and changes in personality. The loss of short-term memory is usually one of the first symptoms. As it causes the brain to shrink, later on, long-term memories are also impaired, particularly explicit memories. In the later stages of the disease, many people are unable to recognize family and have major changes to personality and often become aggressive. The major risk factor for Alzheimer's is increasing age, and there is no cure, right? They haven't quite pinpointed why people get Alzheimer's, but they do see that there is a correlation between age and Alzheimer's. Currently, an accurate diagnosis can only be made after death. So you can make assumptions about whether or not someone has Alzheimer's disease. However, there is only one accurate way to determine it, and that is to actually, do an autopsy after death. And they've worked out that brains are, severely shrunk due to the death of neurons. So if one neuron dies, the ones next to it also die because there's no neural charge, I'm going to go with neural charge, that is sent to those neurons. And because they're not receiving anything, they then start to die off themselves, which then kills off the next ones, and then the next one, and the next one, right? So it could only start off very small, but then it gets worse. The medial temporal lobe, particularly the hippocampus, is most affected. So we'll just highlight that as well. With up to 3/4 of the neurons lost. Sufferers also have a buildup of amyloid plaques. Now, I'll change the color here for this one. So you need to make sure that you remember why, not necessarily why it occurs, but what actually occurs as a result of Alzheimer's disease. So there's a buildup of amyloid plaques, which are a hard protein known to form around neurons. And when they form around neurons, it usually means that they can't communicate with one another. It's like a brick wall between neurons. There's also a structure known as the Neurofibrillary Tangles, also known as tau, right? And it's TAW, and this occurs within neurons, and that actually kills the neuron within the neuron. So it stops the transmission of information through the neuron. And once that happens, it actually starts to die off because, once again, there's no messages being passed along. Right? So it inhibits transport of essential substances. Finally, people with Alzheimer's have a low level of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is great to say. So, factors that affect a person's ability to remember, pretty much forgetting, which most of you are going to be doing during the exam anyway. So, forgetting is the inability to access and recover information. It doesn't mean that that it's gone forever. It just means that at some point you don't have the correct cues to actually retrieve it. So you need the correct retrieval cues to help you to remember information that is currently stored in memory. You might not be able to recall it, but it's mainly because you haven't, actually included the correct cues to help you to remember. A context-dependent cues are environmental cues. And these are the environmental cues where the memory was formed originally. Think about it when you leave your bedroom to go to the kitchen. And as soon as you get to the kitchen, you go, wait, why was I going to the kitchen? And you have to walk back to your bedroom to remember. This is a context-dependent cues because you've thought about it in your bedroom and then you go to your kitchen and then back again so you can remember it. So you're going back to the same environment. And this usually involves the sights, the sounds, the smells, and police will often do this with eyewitnesses. They'll take them back to the scene of the crime so it'll jog their memory slightly. State-dependent cues are associated with an individual's physiological and or psychological state at the time that the memory was formed. So you're more likely to remember information if you're in the same state as when you learnt it. So sadly, if you have put your keys somewhere when you were drunk, you're more likely to remember them again if you actually go out and get drunk again. You're more likely to remember where you put them because you're in the same state as what you were when you first lost your keys. All right, so the next part, I did tell you that it was all over the place, is the serial position effect. Now, the serial position effect, you do need to know how this actually relates. So you need to be able to draw the serial position. Make sure you know that off by heart. So serial position effect is a finding that free recall is better for items at the end and beginning of a list than for items in the middle. The primacy effect describes superior recall at the beginning. The recency effect describes superior recall at the end of the list. I like to remember it as, if it's primacy effect, think primary school, that's what you do first. Recency effect is what is recent. That's pretty much it. So there are two different types of rehearsal. And maintenance rehearsal is involving the repeating the information being remembered over and over again, which sometimes works, but if you're doing this while studying for an exam, it's not going to work unless you've done it 100 times or so. It's better to actually use elaborative rehearsal. And elaborative rehearsal is linking new information in a meaningful way. Right, so if you're linking, let's say for example, you're learning about psychology or the terms in psychology, every single definition you find, you should relate it to yourself. And this will actually get to long-term memory better and faster, and it will make retrieval a lot easier. So it's really important to make sure that you know this. This is very basic, but make sure that you do. Alrighty, so before, in the previous one we talked about memory, you need to put this in. So you'll see that sensory memory, once you've paid attention to it, it goes to short-term memory. if you maintain it, it stays in short-term memory. It doesn't go anywhere. But if you use elaborative rehearsal and add meaning to it, it's more likely to go to long-term memory, right? So make sure that you are actually using elaborative when studying for your exams. So some tips. It is a generally a heavy examined area, particularly in multiple choice, just like learning. Know the model of memory inside out. It just makes things easier. So know that the table for the Atkinson and Shiffrin. You know the duration and capacity for each and every one. Know the role of the hippocampus and what happens if it's damaged. Same with the amygdala and the cerebellum. And understand Loftus's study, which is in a different video, as it shows the reconstruction of memory. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.